Australia's support of veterans requires fundamental reform. That's the scathing assessment from a new Productivity Commission report. The major inquiry finds the $13 billion system's too complex and fails to meet the needs of those it's supposed to help. The report warns the system fails to focus on the lifetime wellbeing of veterans and calls for a new services agency to be established. The Commission's walked back its previous call for the Veterans Affairs Department to be scrapped altogether. Joining us now live to discuss that is Veterans Affairs Minister Darren Chester. Darren, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
So what do you make of this Productivity Commission report? A lot of the findings wouldn't be entirely unexpected.
Well, the report was commissioned by the government best part of 12 months ago. So throughout the last 12 months, the Productivity Commission has met with hundreds of people around Australia, received 300 submissions on the draft report. And it's pretty consistent with the feedback I've received in the roundtables I've conducted with ex-service organisations and veterans themselves. They certainly deeply appreciate having their own departments. They want to see the Department of Veterans Affairs continue to represent their interests. But the argument is that it's grown over 100 years to become more complex, too fragmented, the system's hard to navigate. And we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years in terms of trying to reduce that, but the Productivity Commission is basically saying you're going to need to go further if you're going to achieve the outcomes you want to achieve for veterans for the next 100 years.
The Productivity Commission had suggested that DVA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, should go completely, but they've backtracked on that?
That's sunk like a stone, I've got to say, Kieran. It's sunk badly. Look, basically the veteran community said, we actually want to see you improve our current system. We like having our own department. We like the fact that DVA can be deeply embedded in defence and work with the Department of Defence, but they want us to stand alone and set the policies and the strategies for veterans, particularly on their transition into civilian life. So there's a lot in the report. There's 69 recommendations, more than 900 pages. I've had a good read of it myself already. I need to read it again, I've got to say, to get through some of the real detail of it. And the important point was we decided to release it even though we don't have a formal government response yet, because I think it's important that the ex-service community gets to have a good look at themselves and see what they like about or don't like about it.
There's one of the stronger recommendations from the report has been about access to compensation, that there needs to be streamlining of the schemes that veterans are able to access to get that compensation. A lot of Australians would be really horrified at the idea that veterans are having to wait so long to get that money.
I think Australians will appreciate that our veterans do receive a great deal of support in the sense that there's, as you indicated in your introduction, billions of dollars provided to veterans and their families. But the complexity of it has become a real problem. And what's happened, I think, Annalise, over 100 years is things have been added to the system, added, and it hasn't really then meshed all together into a seamless system. So if you started today, you wouldn't have the 3 different acts we have now to work with. That makes it hard for veterans. It makes it hard when they're navigating it. So I think the improvements we've made over the last 3 years, the Productivity Commission is complementary of that, but they're basically saying you're going to need to go further. And so we've got a lot of work now to work through all the recommendations, all the findings, and see what things can we do straight away and what are some of the longer term challenges, because they're recommending over a period of 5 or 6 years to bring in the major changes.
The Productivity Commission renowned for being the number crunchers, the hard heads.
Hard heads in Productivity Commission.
So have they shown enough human touch in terms of their response here, firstly? And secondly, just in terms of the myriad of groups that work in this space, we know the RSL, Soldier On, Mates for Mates. There are so many groups. What do they say about that?
There's the big dozen or so we'd all know about. There's about 3,000 organisations that claim to do work on behalf of veterans in various shapes and forms. And the Productivity Commission is really a bit critical that that's been allowed to just continue to grow within the community. But there's not much you can do as a government to stop well-meaning Australians wanting to establish new charities to support our veterans. So it is a difficult space for some veterans to navigate. The Productivity Commission, I think, has understood through the conversations it had with our veterans the human side of this. And I've got to say, Kieran, we need to make sure we reinforce in Australians' minds that the vast majority of people who serve in the Australian Defence Force enjoy that service, get great skills, develop leadership, problem-solving skills, they're great teamwork, and then they transition into civilian life and have a successful civilian career as well. But for those who are injured or struggle in some way, that's where we've got
some of the most successful friends of mine in Canberra are former veterans, and they've gone into hugely successul businesses and careers. The
success stories are all over Australia. I mean, I'm not sure if you call transitioning from the Defence Force into politics successful. We've got a couple of dozen of those as well. They've certainly learned how to take on a bit of attack, I guess. But we've got many veterans, and even this week, Philip Thompson, the member for Herbert, made a great speech in the Parliament, his inaugural speech for a guy who served. He spoke about the teamwork, he spoke about the camaraderie, but he also spoke about the sacrifice. He himself was injured, he's lost mates. Phil and other members in this place, and I've written to them all this week saying, I want you to provide your lived experience to me to help us shape up what DVA needs to look like in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. With the Productivity Commission report, are you going to commit to enacting all of the recommendations?
I can't commit that today, Annalise, I'm sorry. It's more about now working through with the Treasurer and the Prime Minister's office on our response over the coming months. We'll get out there now and have more conversations with the ex-service community. I think out of respect to them, I mean, you've got a report that's taken a year to develop. It's more than 900 pages long. There's a lot in it for us. It really does set out a very comprehensive roadmap on how you might do this better into the future over a period of years. And I think it's important to reassure people that the work we're already doing to improve DVA is ongoing and will continue while we look at this Productivity Commission report. Do
you feel you've got the right people in DVA? Are they, not just well-meaning, but are they well-equipped?
Yeah, that's a tough question, Kieran. I think the Secretary of DVA, Liz Costin, is someone who's well and truly equipped in her role. I mean, the senior leadership is very, very strong. I mean, Liz did her own service in the Army, I think 30 years in the Army, and now she's working in DVA and doing good work in that regard. A lot of the Productivity Commission report also highlights we need to take a step right back into when the recruits come into the Defence Force, recognising the well-being of the recruits through training, through their service, then through transition to civilian life, a whole-of-life experience there rather than just DVA picking up the people when they come out. So there's responsibilities put back, I guess, on the Australian Defence Force to see how they can do it better as well.
So, like you said, there's no plans to scrap the department, but will you be streamlining? Is that going to be a focus?
Well, one of the big recommendations in there is this Veterans Services Commission, so we need to have a good look at what that might entail. That's, again, I think a conversation we need to be open to. Another big recommendation there was a Joint Transition Authority, which is about recognising that transition time can be difficult for someone. If you've defined yourself by your uniform and spent 10 or so years in the Army and then maybe got injured, that transition out can be really hard for you. So we've got to make sure our support measures are there in place when they need it, not just in that 1 week, but for weeks and months and perhaps years even, helping them retrain, take on a new civilian role. So I want to assure people that there's a lot of work going on already, but what the Productivity Commission report is saying is you're going to have to move further over a period of years to get a system which is really fit for purpose.
And just finally, what's the role, what's the nexus, for want of a better word, in terms of the DVA and your space and that of the superb director at the War Memorial, Brendan Nelson, and his role there? Yeah,
good point, Kieran. I mean, I think the War Memorial Director's role is a really important one. We recognise that respect and recognition matters. Telling the story of current serving men and women actually matters, because then they know that they're being appreciated by their communities. There's something quite unique about military service because you're putting on the uniform, Navy, Army, Air Force, prepared to place yourself in harm's way potentially to help those who can't help themselves, and we need to respect that service and we try to do it.
We appreciate your time.
Thank you.